Welcome to Cartoon Crossroads Columbus, or CXC 2021. Our 4-day celebration of cartoon art couldn't happen without our partner organizations, to whom we are grateful. CXC is a 501c3 nonprofit organization. Our annual festival, free to the public, relies on corporate and grant support, as well as individual donations. We are grateful for their support. Visit the Support CXC link on our website to find out how you can help us create meaningful connections between the people who make comics and those who read them. Cartoon Crossroads Columbus acknowledges that the ancient ancestors of the Eastern Woodland tribes, now referred to as the Adena and Hopewell cultures, inhabited the land we know as Ohio. Their descendants include the living nations of the Shawnee, Miami, Wyandotte, Delaware, and Seneca, Cayuga. We honor and respect the diverse indigenous peoples connected to this place where we gather. We hope you enjoy the event. Don't forget to visit our virtual expo at cartooncrossroadscolumbus.org and keep the conversation going in our Discord channel, which you can find at cartooncrossroadscolumbus.org/discord.
What's happening, CXC? My name is Ronald Wimberly. I am one of the creators. Maybe it's my mad idea. Maybe LAAB, like I'm maybe like the, I hate to say P.T. Barnum. But anyway, yeah, so I'm here with collaborators on the co-conspirators on the LAAB newspaper, and I'm going to give a brief description of myself, and then they're going to chime in and let you know what they do. I'm a cartoonist. I guess I'm a filmmaker now, animator, and one of the creators of LAAB. Shall we go to Josh?
Hi, I'm Josh O'Neill. I'm the publisher of Beehive Books. We publish LAAB magazine along with a bunch of other things, and I kind of co-edit it with Ron and handle a lot of the logistics and keep a lot of the LAAB trains running on time.
And Tana?
I'm Tana Tucker, and I'm a cartoonist and writer. I had work at a comic in the second issue of LAAB number 4, the death issue.
All right. So
very appropriate.
So, and that kind of calls attention to one of the mysteries of LAAB, which is the numbering system. A mystery we won't address in this interview. We'll talk about other things. We're going to go over like how it comes together, the history of LAAB, how we got started, and how we put this paper together. First off, Josh, why don't you go into a little bit about how Beehive got started, kind of like, I think the economic model that you use at Beehive kind of is, instrumental in kind of like how LAAB came to be as well. Like, because LAAB wouldn't exist without, I think, the way you guys do things.
Yeah, so Beehive, we started in 2016, so I guess we've been around a little over 5 years now. And it sort of spun out of what was called Locust Moon Press. I used to own a bookstore and comic shop in Philly, along with Chris Stevens, and he and another partner, Andrew Carl. We had a small sort of publishing imprint through our bookstore. And we did a number of different books of different kinds. And one of the ways I got to know you, Ron, was through working on a tribute to Little Nemo and Slumberland, which was an idea I had like a long time ago to do this like massive, oversized tribute to Winsor McCay and Little Nemo. And we got all of these amazing cartoonists. There's like 100 and some people in the book, and a lot of the greatest cartoonists of all time were in it. And Ron did an amazing strip for it. And it was this sort of weird, impractical project. It's like the size of a surfboard, this book. And it had so many people in it. And we had, we hadn't done much. We published a few books at the time. And we sort of had this big success with it, partially because we did a Kickstarter that went really well. And so when we closed Locust Moon in 2015, I knew I wanted to start a new publishing imprint. And so we really founded it on the idea of doing these like really strange, unlikely, crowd-funded publishing projects. Stuff that doesn't fit into usual formats, that's really like different than what's already on the bookshelves of bookstores in most places. So when we first started, I founded it with my partner, Maël Delabou, who's an amazing designer and artist and writer and illustrator. And we just started reaching out to like all of the artists whose work we love most and saying like, what's like the strangest thing that you have in the back of your mind that you think there's probably not a realistic outlet for? Like, what's your most unlikely project? And we knew right away we were going to work with Ron. Ron and I we're good friends, and I think he's a genius and one of the greatest cartoonists working today. So we talked about a lot of different projects, and we are currently working on a lot of different projects beyond LAAB, but LAAB was the first thing that we decided to work on. And it's, I mean, I'll leave it to you, Ron, to sort of describe what LAAB is, but I do think our business model that sort of goes around the traditional book trade and goes like right to customers who are looking for stuff that's like really off the beaten track and unusual. Like that business model is why we're able to do this sort of strange things we've been able to do through Beehive. And I think LAAB is really one of those. I mean, we also have a book trade distributor. We sell our books in bookstores, but like our distributor really doesn't know what to do with LAAB. They don't understand how to market it. Like every time I go to these sales conferences and I show people LAAB and they're like, this is cool, but what, like, but, I mean, we have an audience that's been growing and building, and I think that's thanks to the fact that we can sort of communicate with people directly. So I think that's part of how the model of what we do impacts what LAAB is.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was one of the things that even made me, like when we started on the first one, I kind of thought like, well, let's give it a shot, see how it works. And I almost felt like if they really want it, then we'll make it. Right? Like if people don't want it, then it's like, oh, then, great. That was an idea that I had. And, well, it doesn't need to exist because nobody wants it.
Well, that's the crowdfunding model, right? Yeah. You're like asking a question when you launch a project. You're like, do people want this or not?
Yeah. It's funny, like maybe we can like kind of at least say to ourselves that it's less about us manufacturing some sort of desire for a commodity and like our audience. Right? That's probably not true though. Like I remember a while back, I don't remember when this was. I almost wish I had my homie Julian here because he'd remember. But years ago, it was a generation of cartoonists, like young cartoonists, and I was trying to get cats together to kind of work on doing a book where we would all just kind of like tell our stories, maybe periodically, kind of like an anthology thing. And I was gonna call it Baal, right? And that kind of fell through, or maybe was sabotaged. And the name is a hard sell, I think, for conservative types. But the years passed. Like I felt the whole generation of cartoonists changed. Some of us got opportunities. I feel like one of us got an opportunity and kind of like bit the idea. So in a weird sort of way, I got to look and see how it didn't work, right? And then when Josh asked me that, I felt like it was one of the most ambitious things I had thought of. And it was something that I wanted to read more than even just like participate in. To track back, I got started, like one of the comics, like formative comics that I read like in high school was Jordan Crane's 9. And like that was such a vibe, like that I kind of wanted to chase that. And also, you know, when I was thinking about the format, I thought about like what a newspaper was materially for me. That's also actually probably my first experience with comics was probably the Sunday, you know, like the Washington Post, you know, opening it up and putting it on the ground and just like having the whole thing in front of you and like, you know, getting to, you know, read the funnies, the Sunday funnies. That and Chick Tracks. I feel like if you think about Chick Tracks, the Sunday funnies, and if you think like in a weird sort of way, LAAB is kind of like a synthesis of the feelings I got from these three things. You know what I mean? So, and yeah, Josh essentially asked me like what I wanted to do, and you know, always more ambitious. My ambition kind of outstretching my ability. Like LAAB was like, you know, was the idea, and in this case, my ambition doesn't kind of like, you know, reach farther than my abilities because I have such a great team. Like, you know, I have collaborators who come in and, you know, LAAB is really, yeah, it's like the gut bacteria. You know what I mean? It's like it's doing all of this different work. Everyone is involved shaping things in ways that like, you know, maybe I think I'm doing it, but like, you know, actually maybe it's all this gut bacteria that's really doing it. Even informing even the smallest decisions. Tana, so when you came on board, help me remember like what that was even like, because I think the first time we invited folks, it was like a pretty tight list, and the second time we maybe were, I don't know, did we open up?
We had an open call for the third issue. For the second.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay.
It wasn't an open call for the second, or you emailed me, invited me to.
Yeah, no, we didn't do any open call for the second one.
Yeah. I mean, part of my, sorry, go ahead, Ron. Were you still forming a question?
Yeah, no. I mean, I want to tell us about how you got involved. If you had any sort of preconceived notions or around like what might have been expected and how you went about like choosing what you would do.
Okay, right on. I think part of my response too is kind of writing off what you're talking about right now in terms of like where LAAB fits in. And I know it provides like a challenging sort of challenging thing for marketing, but part of the appeal to me, and I would wager most of your readers, is that it's very evocative of what I'm attracted to in like zine culture, which is inherently accessible and often subversive, even down to like the materials that you're using. And I love that it wasn't really, the parameters were pretty open. You know, you have critiques and really abstract and complex, nuanced essays and comics and storytelling and low art. Like, I love that you have all of that collected in one piece. And just, I just love, personally, I love how to me, it's just a no-brainer that's just deeply associated with that kind of culture and history. So when I was invited to do it, I was excited that you invited me for the death issue. And I guess the only expectation I had was wondering about is sort of how you were going to edit my work, which you were pretty hands off. You gave me some feedback, but I, sent you you asked for a quick write up and to take a look at the script I had, if any. And then the only sort of parameter was 1-page comic and mind the fold. Those are the only and the color palette. And to honor, there was a set color palette. And so, I used it as an opportunity. I mean, all the projects I'm working in, I have personal projects, but at that time and currently I'm involved in things that are sort of beholden to others or, are maybe commercial projects. So it kind of arrived at a time when I just got to be really experimental and try something pretty new. And so I used it as an opportunity to tell a ghost story, which, if you know me, is kind of funny because I don't really dabble in horror that much, or I'm actually not into horror and kind of scared of like horror subject matter. But yeah, it's the death issue. I used it, as an opportunity to experiment with that and push myself. Like, what does a ghost story feel like coming from me and my aesthetic framework and political framework? And I just used it as an opportunity to wonder and dream and ponder what does the world look and feel like in a post-apocalypse after, we've recovered. And I think that fit in with the theme of everything else that was going on in the collection of work that you had. So.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it was great contribution, and part of like, I don't know if I have any, maybe the biggest indulgence is like the selection process, right? Like who I want to be in the paper and like, next to whom, you know what I mean? And I think what working with Josh has given me is an opportunity to really kind of like fulfill that sort of, want of mine, which is like seeing different people come together under, one sort of like, roof in one place to kind of have the works communicate with each other, which is what LAAB is too. Like one of the fundamental ideas of LAAB is, and the longer we do it, the more this really starts to like come to the forefront. Is just like what's next to what, or like what gives context to what just by being sort of in proximity. And like in this sense, I feel like LAAB and the producers of LAAB, the people who are working in LAAB, the artists, are kind of like LAAB is sort of is a recapitulation of like what a comic is like in a small form, like in microcosm, you know what I mean? Like, so having, putting a panel, some comics are just one panel, but a particular type of comic that we tend to have in LAAB deals with pictures being next to each other, right? And I think like LAAB kind of is, reproducing that quality, in macrocosm. And like that, like how are these artists, how are these elements, even like design elements, Natalie and Chloe, like what they did in our last issue, like how are these elements interacting, like, and how is this collectively, what are the ideas that these things are giving you or triggering because of just their proximity? Josh, so for us to kind of like do this though, we require strong organizational skills, you know what I mean? Like you do a lot of wrangling, you know what I mean? Like, yeah, can you talk to us a little bit about how, and like, yeah, please, if I can try to help.
Well, I want to get into that, but I'm also interested in what you were just saying, because it does seem like LAAB in the sort of conception of it is like an exercise in sort of juxtaposition and putting things in proximity to each other. But like you made a very intentional choice in the first issue. I mean, the first issue is overwhelmingly your work. There's a couple of guest contributors, I think, in there, but it's like 90+% of what's in the first issue was all by you. And I feel like that was a pretty intentional choice of a way to approach like sort of planting a flag of like what this magazine is in a way where you don't have to explain it to people. And then like it was a gestational kind of choice, and I'm just like interested in that choice.
Well, I don't know if you remember when you were first telling me like, okay, so what, like we had to record the little thing, you know what I mean? We had to record a little Kickstarter thing. And you're like, okay, so what is it? And I'm like, there's two problems with that. Like one problem is I don't ever want to tell somebody what something is.
Yeah.
Another problem is I don't want, like, I'm figuring out what it is. You know what I mean? Like we hadn't finished it yet. You know what I mean? Like, it was still alive. It was still coming together, So like, that was particularly difficult. One of the things I did know I wanted to do with lab number 0. So when I picked the number, like, the number kind of helps me think about what I want to do, like, loosely. And what I wanted to do was to state plainly, not necessarily, what's the word people use? A worldview, but rather an approach to finding meaning, right? And my approach to finding meaning, and my approach to looking for truth. And so that's why there's all of the sort of, you got plainly stated, or like cartoon, maybe even like a cartoon of, like, I have the manifesto in the beginning. There's a manifesto in every paper, though. In every one, there's not a manifesto, but there's like a little thing that I talk, I speak and write longhand at the beginning. But in the first one, in 0, it's a manifesto. I have like polemics in there. Like, I have a polemic against, like the was it Black Heroes Matters or whatever. Like, I have, that's what that issue was supposed to be. And in a way, I feel like it was, not everyone's going to read that issue. Like, now there aren't many copies. We don't have many copies left. I don't know if we're selling any of them, but I wanted it to state plainly, if not my intent, sort of the mechanics of what might be, how I may be choosing to put things in the paper in subsequent papers. Like, says something about the cat who set, who lit the fuse, because like, yeah. I feel like, I guess, everyone, Remnick is all over the New Yorker, right? Like, you kind of know his beliefs or whatever, but there's kind of like there's always this pretense, like, okay, well, I'm objective. No, we're subjective. Like, we have a very subjective perspective, right? And like, here's what it is, and here's where I'm planting my my perspective, but I'm inviting all these other people to come in too. But even in that sense, it's like, I invited Tana. I'm like, okay, I want Tana to be in the paper. There's a lot of people I didn't invite, So
yeah, well, it's interesting. Like, I feel like from working with you, I know you have like a strong sense of the sort of fragility of the creative process, and how like easily like a heavy hand can kind of crush it. So as an editor, I think you have a sort of reluctance to like push people in any direction or give people like a strong sense of like what you want them to do. But it was an interesting approach to me, because what you did is like you made the first issue of the thing, which like weaves this like DNA strand of it. So it's sort of there, and you don't have to tell people what to do, because they can either read that first issue or not. And if they do, they can sort of take from it whatever they want or not. But I think that the work you did in that first issue is really definitive of a lot of the submissions we get from other people.
For better and worse.
Sometimes, yeah, it can cut both ways. Because people think, I think sometimes people think, oh, I'm supposed to be doing what Ron did in that first issue.
I don't even want to do what I did in that first issue.
Right. It's supposed to grow and change, but like, I do think that was a foundational piece and like a really interesting approach to how to sort of like build the voice of the thing instead of telling anyone what you want the voice to be.
Yeah, it is walking a line, right? Because it's, that is, you hit the nail on the head, was the expression. Because I am always struggling with, okay, so, all right, welcome to the party. Like, kind of trusting the artist to be sensitive about like what they're going to, like what's happening, like read the room, you know what I mean? But like, also be yourself, you know what I mean? Like, do you. last night I was at a show. I mean, I know the plague is happening, but my friend had a birthday. He wasn't able to go, so he gave me tickets. So I went with another friend to this show. And there were people required vaccinations and all that. There were people who got so into the space that they started to stand up, and they didn't really, they weren't thinking about the other people in the room. You know what I mean? Like, they didn't have a sort of sensitivity about what was happening. And it brings to mind, I'm thinking about it right now, because it's like, yeah, LAAB, I know at least for me, when I get invited to something that's like a collective creative thing, or just like being in a space, I think the artists have shown a sort of sensitivity to, even when they don't know who else is going to be in the paper, you know what I mean? Or what else is going to be in the paper. I think the last time everyone could kind of see each other's name, you know, Tana, I'm not sure if you knew who was going to be in the paper that you were in.
I knew some of the artists at that point, but yeah, I would say the experience of an artist contributing and as a reader is that it's very intentional, yet without like overly forced like curation. Yeah. So I mean, part of that, yeah.
Like when you were coming up with your piece, did you feel like it was based mostly on the prompt? I think the prompt was like a series of words. I don't remember it all. I mean, it was like a bunch of phrases. Basically, it was like death, like the Anthropocene, like ontology.
Yeah.
But did you feel like you were basing it mainly on that prompt, or were you also sort of considering what LAAB was up to that point, which at that point was just one issue that mostly Ron created the content for? I'm just curious what that is like.
Yeah, I think it was both. It felt pretty seamless, you know? And I think part of that is a credit to the curation, because I think that what I was already working through in my work made sense with the theme, which was like historical memory and hauntology and, you know, reconciling with how history is shaped and remembered individually and collectively, right? Narratively. So I was already kind of working in that. And then, so yeah, I don't know. It didn't even seem like I had to consciously think about it. It just, yeah, I know that that's not really a good answer to your question, but
it's a great answer.
Yeah, it was, I think that's just a sign of like good curation. Like you brought a collection of artists together on a feeling and a hunch and intention. And, you know, with the work I'm assuming everybody was making at that point in time that you were observing. And then it ended up making sense together, you know, in this collection of work. But I think politically I was already on that tip, you know, as far as like what to expect because of the previous issue. It wasn't even like I had to think that hard about it, because my politics are already so present in the work, which I think Ron knows.
I think there's an element of externalizing conversations that I'm already having too with some of the artists, you know, or maybe if not even kind of like, you know, whatever. You're on Instagram, you've curated your Instagram and you got like, yeah, in this sense, LAAB is definitely also a product of the current moment. You know what I mean? Like, so, because like, yeah, you know, you've curated a type of interaction with media in your life. And LAAB is doing some of that too, like, because it's like, wow, you know, all right, I go to whatever convention, I forget where we met.
CXC.
Yeah, CXC, that's right.
But we had we were talking already before I met you for a couple of years about just like, yeah, critical theory again.
Right. CRT. Yo, every time I read CRT, I'm like, yo, is this like a type of, you know, I think sometimes like, is it the cameras is that what the people in England call the cameras that they got looking at you? Like, what is CRT? And I'm like, oh, right, critical race theory. Never heard anyone call it that before. Anyway.
I just heard that for the first time right now. I didn't know it was
Are
called.
You serious?
I didn't know people were referring to it as CRT.
Yo, that's what the right
news. I think it's just like the right wing for some reason that like abbreviates it.
Yeah,
they need the abbreviation, but like that's also okay. So that brings us back to LAAB. It's an aesthetic act, right? Like it's a way of taking something away from the language that actually describes what it is. You know what I mean? And I think that just, I don't know if it's deliberate, but it's effective. And LAAB is about that too. And that's why Lab Zero was so like chock full of that sort of thing, because I kind of want, it's a conceit. Here it is. It is a conceit that I would like for people to, even if LAAB is just full of like pop culture, just fun, like no, maybe we get to a point where there are no sort of like critical, essays or whatever. But like, I kind of want people to approach, because I don't think, here's a conceit. I don't think the comics need to be created with a political, sort of like an overt political theme or intent, but what I would like for LAAB to do, I would like for LAAB to be a theater of that sort of critical thinking, even if, I don't know, like imagine if I was a billionaire and I was like, oh, I'm gonna license the Superman comic from, what was it, Think magazine, where Superman goes to fucking, picks up Stalin and Hitler and takes them to, fucking court. I'm gonna put that. That's actually a very political one. But like, say if I had all of the money in the world and I was like, okay, I'm gonna put the next issue of Spider-Man is just gonna be in LAAB, right? Like I'm just gonna put like 15 pages of it in there. You know what I mean? I don't give a fuck. Whatever else is in LAAB, I think what I would like is for people, they're gonna look at that Spider-Man a little bit differently. You know what I mean? Like just because of how it's situated, like what it's next to, and the fact that it's in LAAB. And my hope, my big ambition is for people, because LAAB is kind of for, I feel, people who are making comics, critiquing comics, or just like really dedicated to speaking and reading the language of comics and pop culture, So like what I would like for LAAB to do is to give people things to think about as they go and they see, and they read other comics, like their favorite manga, or like, and not in a judgmental way, and not in a way that kind of says like, okay, well, this is essentially what this is doing politically, but more in like a way where it's like, okay, so this could be doing these things, or like, maybe this aspect of like the environment produced this aspect of this comic, like what is this comic doing, or what is this piece of pop culture doing in this space versus another, like how does it function, say in, I don't know, New York versus like, I don't know, Bangladesh or something, you know what I mean? Like that's what I would like for LAAB to do. I guess that's a grand ambition for the readers, and I'm hoping that more and more there's like work in LAAB that, like, a difficult thing we had on the last issue is there was a piece that I couldn't read, like I couldn't edit. It was not in my in my native language, right? But I wanted it in there for both romantic reasons. Like the romantic reason is that, like, when I started out reading comics, a lot of times the comics I liked the most weren't in my language, like just aesthetically, So I have a relationship with a lot of comics that's purely, like I'm reading them, but not the language, It's like, and also I think something about LAAB fundamentally should be that, for readers, even our English readers, like, think about that. Like the world is beyond your little pocket. You know what I mean? Like that, the world is bigger than that. And like, hey, look, now there's something in here you don't understand. There are people in your world for whom the entirety of LAAB is like that. Yeah. You know what I mean? So, but that was tricky. And I know we talked about, it's like, oh, does this seem like are we just sort of reproducing this comic as like an aesthetic, like, kind of like exoticizing it, or something. But it's like, I think that's a legitimate question to ask.
Wait, you say that last part again, Ron?
Yeah, like Josh, do you remember that?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, it was a big thing we were trying to figure out.
Yeah.
Because it's like, I mean, the authors of the comic, I think, wanted to be understood, which is very understandable. They were like, wait, you're not, they were like, well, here's the translation. You can run it next to the comic. And Ron was like, I don't want the translation there. So it's like, the question is like, I mean, is it sort of like orientalizing like this thing and making it just like a beautiful piece of text that has no actual meaning? Or, I mean, I think you had these sort of like deeper aesthetic ambitions for what that was doing. But at the same time, like these authors like wrote it and they want people to read it and understand what it says. So I think we ended up, we did put the translation in there, but we made it like a puzzle. Like
I think we put it somewhere else.
It's not next to it. And like you have to go find it in the magazine.
Which is exactly kind of what I wanted anyway. Like one of the ambitions of it was like, okay, so if you're reading this, like, I don't know, you see the people with like, the tattoo and it says something crazy, or Gratnin. Gratnin has like a ton of Japanese in it, right? So like, why is it in there? It's like, I have to it literally is a representation of my relationship with my homies and the people in my life who actually influenced the creation of Gratnin, like, my connection to these people, right? Like, so while at one point it is indicative of like the commodity, the soft power of Japan, you know what I mean? But it's also indicative of like, oh shit, well, the first time I even learned about Tengu is because my homie Kibo was like, oh yeah, well, it's possible that Yoshitsune in a jungle, like in Mount Kurama, it's a long story, but long story short, there's like this guy, Ushiwakamaru, is Yoshitsune, right? Like he's kind of like this, he's a very important figure. He went to the woods and he learned how to sword fight from like Tengu, which is like, coincidentally, I happen to have a shirt on with a Tengu right now, which is like, sometimes they look like crows, sometimes they look like monks with like a long nose, right? And when I was in college, the homie would talk to me about the history of these things. And he'd be like, yeah, some people think like maybe those were shinobi or whatever. And I'm like, yo, this is crazy. So like, from that moment, I was hyped about it, right? Like also one of the epithets for it's like Slayer of Vanity. You know what I mean? It's like this goblin, you know what I mean? I'm like, yo, I love this character. And like, from that moment, I started to be really into this character, whatever. So, but like, this is my relationship to it. My hope is that when people see things that they don't understand, that they start to dig, you know what I mean? Like, because digging is just such an important, for me, it's just such a formative part of like my whole personality. Like having to find something or finding something and then having to find out like, okay, so what does that mean? Like, where is this from? Like, who made this? Like, where are they from? Like, it's been such an enriching process for me that like, when I think about like, yo, if someone opens this paper and like, first of all, they're agitated, right? Like the feeling of just like, oh, there's something here I don't understand. Like that makes me feel a way. It's not like something that's just spoon fed me. And then it's like, well, do I know anyone who can read this? You know what I mean? Like, can I use Google Translate to try to figure out what this says? Like, this is a mystery. Like something about that really turns me on because I'm like, it's an active engagement with the thing. You know what I mean? I don't know. Does that make sense?
I think you arrived at a fair compromise of including it somewhere in the paper. I wonder where the author landed with it, but yeah, I think you kept it in the paper, but it's like, okay, as a reader, you have to be really thoughtful about how you get to access this and think about why this isn't immediately available to you.
Yeah, I think it's upside down on the same page or something.
Yeah, I gotta
pick it up to look at it.
It's like at the bottom of the page, like sideways maybe or something like that. But I mean, it's sort of a meta thing because I mean, as so many things in LAAB are, because that's like one of the themes of that issue in particular is appropriation and exoticism and like there's so much material that's addressing that like really directly, or sometimes indirectly. But so that became like a weird case where it was like the making of the magazine was like an instance of the content of the magazine.
I mean, that's the truth of the project, though, right? The truth of the project is it's our process and practice that's like, you know, I think foremost important. Like, it's the building of a relationship. So LAAB is also like how two friends get to know each other and work with each other. And it's like, and a bunch of y'all are just reading the newspaper, but it's like, you know, it's like also me and Josh's friendship. You know what I mean? It's like, and a lot of the people who we invite, it's like, it's a weird sort of pulp personification of these different relationships, you know? So.
Yeah, and like a feeling of building community among a lot of the contributors too.
Yeah.
Which is a powerful thing. And the sort of like trust that develops over time as you work on this stuff.
I hope to meet more people who were in the newspaper one day.
I mean, I think that's it's another thing that's so special about it. It doesn't just feel like a commission and we're like working in these like siloed things. It's like, okay, we're contributing to and building community. So some of the artists I already knew and I was, maybe good friends with, and then I met people through that and got to know them through their work. And I think it's, community building for the readers and the contributors. And that's kind of like the part of that feels like zine community, which is also what I've come out of. So I don't know. I know, Josh, it's probably hard for you when you're at those conferences, but I love that it doesn't fit neatly.
That's everything we do is like that. I mean, 90% of what I bring to those conferences, they're like, what? But that's all my favorite stuff is the stuff that doesn't fit. I mean, that's the whole theme of Beehive. Like, that's what we do.
Yeah.
And like LAAB is perfect for what we do. And it's one of my favorite things to work on. It's been a real joy working on it. Privilege.
My heart is exploding. All right,
it's an adventure. It's like each issue is really a different experience than the previous one was, and we take something from, and we sort of figure it out as we go, and it's a thrill.
Well, I mean, I think maybe we should end on that. It seems like a really nice way to end friendship, community. Yeah. Thanks for joining me, folks. It was a pleasure, and I hope this illuminated some of what we do and why and how, or I hope it actually made more questions. Like, maybe we'll see how you ask those questions or answer those questions in your own newspapers, or zines or things that you pass around, if we ever are in the same space again. All right, so bye.
Thank you.
This was fun.
Thank you so much.
Okay, so Josh and Ronald, if you are here, you can turn on your cameras now. Hello.
Jersey.
Hey, good to see you. My goodness, what a great conversation that was. And we had some comments and questions coming in while that was going on. But if I could take advantage of my role as being the person in the room with you, one of the ones that I thought was like, I felt a little jolt of electricity when you're talking about it. And I would love you to elaborate more on it. And Ronald, correct me if I'm misreading what you were really talking about there, but there was some talk about, I feel like you were talking a little bit about like deciding on what to do in a project, partially based on what you want to do, what you want to say or explore through it, but also your experience of making it. It felt to me like you were kind of talking about like the experience that you have as an artist making the thing matters to you. Is that true? Was I hearing that correctly?
Yeah, I mean, I feel the only reason why and a large portion of it is, I think if ultimately, if I can't find some meaning in the process of the making, then they're just more efficient ways of communicating, I guess, or maybe not. I don't know. Yeah, I think there's like the formal problem of, well, what do I have to make the art? You know, what opportunities do I have? But there's also sort of like a sensual one, which is like, you know, how can this be a pleasurable experience, you know, or a meaningful experience? You know, sometimes not the same thing, but you know.
I really love that distinction because I teach comics classes for young people, and especially when they hit like 13, 14 years old, they start getting really kind of uptight about like, what's the right tool? I want to do it correctly, you know? And I'm like, well, there's no right or wrong tool. What matters is how you feel when you're doing it. And they're like, that's not good enough. That doesn't get me to correct, right? But this takes me to my second question for you, both you and Josh, because another theme that I picked up on in that discussion was this idea of trusting and enjoying the emergence and spontaneity, like discovering what something can be in the art. It sounds like that is an important part of what you do with LAAB. Am I correct in that?
Josh, you want to go first?
Yeah, I mean, you know, LAAB is much more your vision than mine, but I do think that's true. And I think just sort of, you know, relating back to what you were saying a second ago, like I mean, the experience of discovering and creating something, like that's what makes art different from like rhetoric or speech, right? Like the point is not just to like communicate an idea. The point kind of is to have an experience, and like just in the process of making things, that's like when you discover what they are and when they become what they are. It's a terrible way of communicating. It's like, I mean, why would you draw a comic if all you want to do is tell someone something? Like that's the most elaborate possible way to tell someone something and the least efficient. But like, I mean, to me, kind of the whole point is the journey of discovery that you go on while like figuring out how to do it, and sort of what you take from I mean, I think it's enriching to have a sort of process oriented attitude towards this stuff. Like everything, eventually you finish it and you release it, and then it's sort of over. It was just a thing that you did, but you learned stuff from it, and you had some kind of experience that changed you in some way, and that changes whatever is coming next, which is much more interesting than trying to make something perfect.
Yeah. No, I'm in the same place with it. I don't really have much to add to it.
But it is, I mean, I don't know, if LAAB wasn't fun, like why would we do it? Yeah. It's not like that lucrative, you know?
Yeah, and I mean, it's a way to, I don't know, the communication aspect isn't necessarily just between, you know, like some hypothetical, you know, audience, but also it's like, I don't know, it's something I feel for friends and associates to do together. You know what I mean? And like figuring out things about life and the work, and like getting articles in the newspaper that, you know, I want to read, or like, I don't know, with like Sarah Jaffe, it's like, I just essentially asked her to write an article that I wanted to read that she'd written. She hadn't written yet, you know what I mean? And then, yeah, like I asked an illustrator to make an illustration that like I wanted to see that they hadn't done yet. And like, that ended up being the article, you know what I mean? So like, I don't know. I think, I mean, I guess that kind of sums it up.
I mean, that's a pretty good privilege, being able to like order up like art and writing like you're in a restaurant.
Right, yeah.
But not like a restaurant with no menu. Just like whatever you want.
Well, yeah, I'm reminded of I was at a comics convention years ago, and you know, in different towns, it's as a vegetarian, it's not always the easiest thing for me to find a place where I can get like a good meal. And I went to this really fussy place where I was just like, could you just like tell the chef that I don't eat meat and just surprise me, just do something cool? And that was like one of the best meals I've ever had in my entire life. And I think that. I think that
because it was
like
meat in it. No, I'm joking.
It was actually a steak.
Oh my god, that was yes. That is the hidden last panel of that story. Was the chef cutting up a pig for me? But what I love is that sense of trust and that sense of like earnest kind of like looking for emergence. I think is something that it's really tough for a beginning artist to understand because you're so worried about like honing your craft and showing that you know what you're doing, and then to suddenly like get involved in that dance aspect of it, like let's find out what this is. I think is something that, as you were describing it, Ronald, in the previous talk, I felt goosebumps just thinking about like being on the edge of this could either be awesome or it could be disastrous. We'll find out. We're gonna get there, you know. But that leads me to this question, because you also talked about like curation and wrangling and curation. Like there's like you only touched on wrangling a little bit, and that got me wondering, like in your heads, what does it look like when you see someone who would make a great contributor, both in their art and in the way they engage with the world? Because like I felt like I heard elements of both. Like there's something in the way that they draw, and there's something in their voice as an artist, but there's something in their voice as a person that I think was coming through in that. Either one.
I can jump off right at the beginning. I bring all of my prejudices around beauty with my selection part of it. You know what I mean? And I think outside of that, if something, I mean, maybe even first and foremost, and then like, if there's something conceptual that's happening, yeah, you know, like that may affect what, you know, a choice of mine. But like it's mainly beauty, and like, I mean, I'm not gonna front like nepotism isn't a big part of it. You know what I mean? Like you know, it's like someone's work who I might not even like that much, but like they're a great person. I like this person. I want them in the newspaper. Like they said something at the bar that was like really, you know, blew my mind. And like maybe here's a chance for them to do something like that on the page. That might be the thing, right? But yeah, it's often superficial. Like it's not, I mean, that was one of the problems that I thought about too, is just like, I have, you know, the fact that I've been able to work professionally at the scale that I have speaks to kind of like where I fit into, or like what I produce aesthetically, and maybe like what my tastes are, how they relate to like the mainstream. You know, like some people, not to politicize it too much, but like, you know, that's what we do. Some people might say it's like, you know, like a culture, like cultural hegemony, right? Like, so I went to art school, you know, like I learned how to draw certain ways. I looked at certain artists, and that influences my taste. I would say like that's one of the most difficult parts about LAAB, because like at one sense I understand that, and at the other, and at the same time I'm like, but I want this to look like something that I want to look at. So that's a conceit. Yeah. Josh is maybe a counterpoint in that sense though, right?
In what sense?
Your feedback, your perspective, you know, even, you know, when you've suggested people be in the paper, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I think we come from a somewhat similar place. I mean, I try to be more of a sounding board. I definitely make a lot of suggestions. But I would say like the curatorial vision of LAAB is really where like your voice probably comes through most strongly. And I do bring a lot of people and say like, what about this person or that person? But it's very much like, it's not like a dialogue that we have where it's like, oh, well, I think this and you think that. I say, how about these like 8 people? And you're like, yes to these 3, no to these 5. And I'm like, cool, moving on. Like, it's just part of how this works. And I kind of appreciate it because I don't know. I think I think you have a very strong sense of how you want to approach this thing. And I mean, it sort of just ends up becoming this like weird little fingerprint of a certain space and time and series of social relationships and printing techniques, and it's this little whirlpool snapshot of all this stuff that's going on, and that's all. I mean, that's all you can really ask anything like this to be. I mean, that's what's so exciting when you find one of these like weird zines from the 70s or something, and you feel like suddenly you have this little portal into this like very, very particular milieu and place and just we sort of way of being in the world. And it's very interesting to me that somebody could sort of find a yellowed copy of LAAB, 50 years from now, if there's still people 50 years from now, and have like, I mean, it always provokes more questions than it gives you answers. It doesn't tell you like what it's like to be like, in San Francisco in 1976 or whatever. But it makes you think about what it's like to be in San Francisco in 1976. And
you get foraging advice.
Yeah, exactly. It gives you something to sort of dive into, and there's all these interesting people who've had totally different careers, and the idea that you could find this paper and find all these people and sort of it seems like a good starting point into getting into a certain kind of strange world that I think Ron and I both inhabit different parts of. So I'd say it's one of the most fun parts for me.
I feel like that's a very mature approach, and that's a very thoughtful approach to making art. And like you said, it's like, yeah, like there's more efficient ways to tell points, but also I feel like, we live in a time, well, we've always lived in times where there's certain people who really want to tell you how it is through their art. And I think that the thing I was most impressed by was that sense of trust and emergence that you were describing in the process of making LAAB. I don't want to take up too much of your time. I mean, I'm grateful that you've made the time to be here for these live Q&As, but I wanted to point to the fact that, and I'll share my screen again for this, that there is the 2021 Columbus Comics Residency LAAB magazine on display at the Columbus Museum of Art at 480 East Broad Street. And admission is free on Sundays, but do go check it out. Ronald, you were here in town for that.
Yes, no, I was having fun hanging out with the locals. Hanging out with Mossy and Staven. Shout out to Sims and Hannah.
That's right, yeah. Yes, and you could see Ronald Wimberly in conversation with CM Campbell in our feeds on our YouTube channel. That was earlier this week.
Craig.
Yeah, Craig Campbell. We had one more question from Facebook that if you have the time to answer, they're saying... this is like listening to two friends describing a third separately when talking about LAAB. And, and they say, I'm curious about how each of you define LAAB at this point. What overlaps or differs?
Josh, you go first.
Oh, God. I mean, I really don't know how to define LAAB. I mean, I really think like I have not known since the beginning, and I feel like it keeps changing, and I'm always catching up with Ron's initial vision for it. And I think at some point I get to a point where I'm like, okay, I get what Ron thought about it 3 months ago. But by the time I get to that point, I no longer understand what you're doing. And that to me is really part of the fun of it, like just trying to like keep up with like what it's turning into. And I feel one of the things that I both most respect and I think sometimes be a source of frustration between us working together is like your like total faith in the sort of process of emergence. And I think in some ways I could be a bit more heavy-handed as an editor. It's like, okay, what are we trying to do here? And I think like sort of navigating between like my urge to do that and my genuine faith in like that you sort of aesthetically, you have like the vision for this thing, and my role is to try to make it happen. And you know, I mean, I have strong points of view about a lot of stuff. We go back and forth sometimes pretty intensely on certain things. But that's I'm very loath to try to like define lab in any way, because it's like the process of defining lab is like what lab is, I think. So
yeah, well put, bro. Like, I mean, I couldn't say it better. And like, I two things that to jump off of what you were saying, like, yes, like that process of discovery, is a big part of it. Like, and also I feel like you just described to me, like I've been wondering about myself, like, you know, a spiritual aspect. Like, do I have a spiritual aspect, right? And I think what you described is what I would probably say is maybe a spiritual aspect, like the faith in, yeah, in that process, and also in experience, like through the senses, to like find some sort of a meaning or truth, you know, or the overlap of the, you know. So I think, yeah, that's probably what lab is for me now. But also in a very practical way, everything that I'm doing, I'm working towards, you know, like my grand desire is for lab to be something that can platform. So outside of myself, like in the world, the platform interesting voices and ideas, and hopefully grow to a point where it can, like, yeah, facilitate people being able to produce things that are not necessarily supported right now, you know. And internally, like for myself, it's a way to kind of like, I don't know, connect with artists, and to have, you know, give a little space so that I can, like, you know, like I said before, read things that I want to read, or like, you know, giving a writer a prompt, or like commissioning an illustration is like, I mean, I see the draw in it, you know, but also with just like not so heavy handed to let it just do what it does. And sometimes that means it comes out like not how you wanted it to come out, or like imagined it to come out, you know. That's how I see lab right now, though. Something that I'm not quite able to, you know, I don't want to put the pins in the wings, you know. I want, you know, let it flutter about, figure out what it is, try to see it, you know.
What a great image. Oh my gosh. Yeah. You have some very enthusiastic fans in the CXC Discord. Brandon Lionheart is quoting you over and over again in there. So yeah, this was fantastic. I thank you both for your time. Is there anything else that you wanted to point to or bring attention to? Beehivebooks.com.
We're launching something big in the next month. So yeah, Beehive and Lab got something we're doing relatively soon, Josh.
Very soon. In about a month, we're launching, like, it's not Lab, it's a different major project that we're doing with Ron. And that'll go live. We're doing a Kickstarter that'll be probably very beginning of November. So if you go to beehivebooks.com, you can subscribe to our mailing list. You can follow us on social media, and you'll see all the stuff. It's a really cool thing. I'm really excited about it.
If you're excited about it, Josh, does that mean it's not going to fit on a bookshelf very easily?
Yep. I will say yes to that. We talked about in the last, in the panel, we talked about me taking things to our distributor, and they're like, I don't know, this is definitely, they're going to be like, go home. Like, what are you doing? They're going to have no idea what to do with this one. But I
an
think
interesting
the
problem.
people will like it. I think like the people will buy it.
Yeah.
The
I'm
bookstore
gonna
is
go.
very confused.
I'm gonna go on my Patreon tonight and talk about what this thing is. My neglected Patreon, like, you know, look, I'm not gonna tell you to join it because I sure as hell don't be on there as much as I should be. But like, I'm gonna go on there. I'm gonna go on there tonight because I really owe them some. I owe them some time. I've been a bad patron. Patreon.
Well, let me screen share that real quick so people
Patrony.
can see it.
Yeah.
And this is patreon.com/Ronald Wimberly. Everybody do go there.
There's an exclusive announcement happening tonight.
I guess I go there to shoot the shit. Like on the 4-tier level, I go there to shoot the shit. It's essentially people. I have it like the $12 tier level is like I talk about things that I probably might get in trouble for, you know, like I'm not supposed to talk about on occasion. $4 is just like so I don't have to get questions from people who don't have any stakes in it. I feel like I'm less likely to have people trolling me if they had to spend $4. And if they spent $4 to troll me, then like, hey, I'll give you $4 worth of time. You know?
Oh, I love that attitude. Well, both of you, thank you so much, Josh and Ronald. This was wonderful, and we really appreciate having you part of CXC. And we'll put links to these things in the notes for the video as well.
Thank you.
All right. Yeah, it was a pleasure.